Good evening and welcome to the Woking Borough Council Planning Committee. So we've just got a few points to go through before we actually start the formal agenda. We have a PA system. Mobile phones should be switched off or on silent, and there is no fire drill planned tonight. Proceedings are filmed and will be available on the Woking Borough website. You see the camera there. From that position, committee members, council officers and registered speakers will be recorded, but speakers may ask not to be filmed, but their comments will be audio recorded. The planning committee is made up of 9 elected members, which we have 8 of us here tonight. I'll just ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Philip Holsworth, Borough Councillor for Winch.
Bill Soane, ward member for Loddon Ridley.
Angus.
Councillor Angus Ross, ward member for Woking Without.
Wayne Smith, member for Hurst.
Michelle Shepherd-Denny, member for Winch.
Martin Richards, member for Norries in Woking Town.
John Kaiser, member for Barkham and vice chair.
And Tim Holden, chairing Hawkden, which is in Lower Early. Right. We are supported and advised by a variety of professional council officers, and now I'll ask each of those to introduce themselves, starting on my far right.
I'm Arabella Yandel and I'm the clerk for the meeting.
My name is Lindsay Jennings, I'm a solicitor at Woking Borough Council and I'm here to advise the committee this evening. Sorry, my name is Lindsay Jennings and I'm a solicitor for Woking Borough Council and I'm here to advise the committee on any legal issues that may arise this evening.
I'm Keith Bates, Assistant Director, Delivery and Infrastructure. So it's a new job title.
I'm Chris Easton, Service Manager for Highways and again advising members on highway matters.
Right, thank you very much. Planning officers presenting tonight's applications are sat on my far left, and I will introduce those at the appropriate time. This is a quasi-judicial committee with formal set procedures and conduct. Firstly, the planning officer will present each application. Then I will call in turn only those who are pre-registered to speak. Please come forward to the table. The microphone is controlled by the grey button on the base. The time limit is 3 minutes for each category of speaker and will be strictly enforced. So please ensure you get your key points across within the allotted time. Members of the committee are interested in the quality of what you have to say and not for how long you speak. I emphasise that only those that are pre-registered to speak may do so. No other town or parish councillors, agents, applicants or representatives or supporters are permitted to address the committee, ask questions or interrupt the meeting. Following the planning officer's presentation and the comments of the registered speakers, the planning committee members will consider, question and seek clarification for the application and hopefully reach a decision which may or may not agree with the planning officer's recommendation. Finally, a reminder that the local planning authority's role is to determine any valid planning application using local and national planning policy. Our role is not to suggest alterations to schemes, whether they are a good idea or indeed needed, whether they are too costly or whether there are alternative uses. So thank you very much, and we'll move on to the formal part of the agenda. Right. Apologies.
Councillor Jarvis is not attending.
Thank you. And then we have the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any amendments to that? No? So please have a show of hands that all in favour of those minutes. Thank you very much. Moving on to the third item then, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. For item 22, in my previous executive role, I assisted the applicant with their application and received hospitality. As it could be seen, I'd predetermined the decision. I declare a personal interest and will leave the room and not take part in that item.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other declarations? No? Okay. Are there any applications to be referred or withdrawn? Okay, thank you very much. Right, we move on then to the first application, which is agenda item 16 on page 11. It's the land east of Finchampstead Road. It's a full application for the change of use of land to a suitable alternative natural green space, then known as a SANG. It's before the committee as it's a major development, and it was deferred from last month for a site visit, which all but one member attended, and case officer is Ashley Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. As you say, this item was deferred from the previous committee meeting, so I will only touch on issues that have either arisen since then. The application is still for the use of land as suitable alternative natural green space, a use considered acceptable in a countryside location, and is 11.23 hectares in size. The committee visited the site last Friday to view the proposed development in its context. And so I'll move on to the items in the addendum report. There are no further matters to update apart from the items in this report. This focuses generally on the issues raised at the last committee meeting, the first of which was the suggestion that the application is premature. The application is considered by officers to conform with the development plan as a SANG. We have to leave the issue of the housing aside. The SANG itself is considered consistent with the development plan, and as such, officers consider it can't be considered premature. The housing application is still under consideration, and a public consultation will start shortly on new information relating to that application. There was discussion at the last committee about veteran trees on the site. I can confirm that we have had reconsultation with the tree and landscape officer, who has confirmed that they are fully satisfied that the access and car park can be delivered without any impact on veteran trees, and the condition previously included on the recommendation from June is still in effect on the recommended conditions on this report. We had a question about the maintenance of the SANG. I've checked, and again, as this isn't linked to any housing application, we can't require separate maintenance payments to be made for this SANG at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers registered, so I'll call the first one, which is Imogen Chadwick-de-Bray from Wokingham Town Council. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm here representing Wokingham Town Council, although I'm a borough councillor, but and basically our objectives on the ground is that this application has been made to support an unsustainable development. We strongly agree that the statements that were made at the previous meeting by David Lee, in that this application is intrinsically linked to the application for housing, and it is presuming that the housing development application will go ahead, and therefore we think it's presumption. The applicant has included an application for an ecological appraisal report prepared by FPCR Environmental Design Limited. Paragraph 1.9 states that the proposals include up to 250 dwellings and associated infrastructure. On page 57 in paragraph 4.3, it also confirms that the SANG is proposed to ensure an alternative recreational resource is available adjacent to the development site. And in 4.10 it refers to the habitats being lost through development of residential properties. With this information, the application for housing should be, and this application should be treated as one, and therefore it should certainly be considered premature. The application as a whole is outside the current development boundary, which is in contravention of policy CP11, and it is a green gap between Finchampstead and Wokingham. And Wokingham Borough Council, Wokingham District Council's own report in June 2000 and June 2006 Green Gap report states the importance of these gaps. Wokingham District Council commissioned a traffic assessment for the same location back in year 2000 for 180 houses. It was clear that Finchampstead Road could not take the traffic from such a development. I cannot see the road has changed for the better since then, and there has been no local facilities added that will make it more sustainable to public transport, and public transport in the area has been reduced. Housing applications should only be considered if they're sustainable, and this application would be clearly unsustainable in its location at this time. The application would also include the removal of some veteran oak trees which are owned by Wokingham Borough Council. I please hope that you'll consider these things as being one of the same application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second person we have is Carissa Flynn, resident. Would you like to come forward?
This planning committee is now well aware of the strength of local feeling that Woodcray is not a suitable site for development. We recognise that the NPPF puts sustainability at the core of the planning process. Our case is that this site is not sustainable, and this has been recognised by the council and previous planning inspectors over the course of the site's lengthy planning history. Repeatedly, our council has done the right thing and successfully resisted attempts to develop Woodcray for sound planning reasons. In 2000, Wokingham's proof of evidence into proposals to earmark Woodcray for development states. The council considers that the site is important to the character of the town, with the character of the area, with the open agricultural fields providing a countryside setting and desirable contrast to the town. The council is concerned that development of the site would greatly increase traffic congestion. The council's decision was upheld by the planning inspector. Again, in 2005, a proposal to develop Woodcray went to a full public inquiry in which the planning inspector stated, Woodcray is an area of prevailingly open land that should be protected. It serves to distinguish between Wokingham and Finchampstead North, preventing their physical merging and hence contributing towards their identity. It continues to do so, and the policies that seek these worthy objectives deserve support. The current proposals to build a SANG to mitigate 250 dwellings on the site are even more ambitious, inappropriate and unsustainable than earlier applications and should be rejected outright as contravention of the local plan. In isolation, the SANG is premature. Unless the housing is approved, it is highly unlikely that the SANG will be built, and it certainly would not be needed. Potentially it would impose an undesirable drain on precious public funds. The applicant's own documentation makes it clear that the two applications are linked. Considering the SANG in isolation takes no account of the combined damaging effects of the two applications on the settlement gap. Even more worrying is the fact that the applicant has submitted the same tree survey in support of both applications, stating that 8 TPO trees will be felled to facilitate development. The officer seeks to impose a planning condition stipulating a new tree survey to protect the 3 trees on the Finch Road, but fails to allude to the other veteran and protected trees on Woodcray Lane. We are asked to accept an assurance that the applicant will desist from removing the oaks that form a significant obstacle to development. These precious trees, integral to the character of Wokingham, would be rendered far more vulnerable if today's application is approved. We respectfully request that this committee is mindful of the wise guidance of their predecessors and planning inspectors and do the right thing by rejecting this proposal on a well-established ground that the site is not sustainable. If this committee is not minded to reject the SANG outright, we ask that the decision be deferred for the reasons set out above, as it is both reasonable and appropriate that the SANG be considered in conjunction with its linked housing proposal.
Thank you very much. And the final speaker is the ward member Julian McGee-Sumner.
Thank you very much, Chairman, committee members. As you know, I'm Julian McGee, I'm the ward member for Westcott, and this development lies within Westcott. The other councillor is Oliver Woodley, who's already here as well. Before you tonight is an application to consider for the provision of a SANG on the Finchampstead Road. Make no mistake, this application is linked to the application for 250 houses, and this should be refused. You may recall that back in 2000, Woking Borough Council defended a decision not to include Woodcray Meadows in the local plan, and the reasons for this were many, but the main part were separation between south and north Finchampstead, and the traffic congestion, and the loss of trees and the countryside amenities. It is clear that the traffic has got significantly worse, and the separation between the two gaps is still required. All of which are still current today. You could agree that the separation, traffic congestion and loss of the trees is actually even more important than it was then. Turning to the applicant's FPCR report on page 57, paragraph 4.9 confirms that the application is in respect of development and that the applicant would have us believe that the two are separate. They are not. This application is outside the development boundary and contravention to policy CP11, as my colleague has already pointed out. WPC in the report of 2000 and 2006 confirms the importance of separation for Finchampstead and Wokingham. WPC on their own traffic survey in June 2006 confirmed that the Finchampstead Road cannot cope with any more traffic. How then we can consider an application that's going to result in 250 more houses and potentially 500 more cars is not clear to me. This application is therefore not sustainable and should be refused. It is also worth pointing out that the Senior Planning Officer back in July 2000, Michael Bell, understood the importance of this gap, so why is this not the case today? We owe our residents to be strong in the face of such applications, and I ask you to consider this development in light of that fact, and I ask you to refuse this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the speakers. Before I open it up to the members, just wanted to come back on some of the points that were mentioned just now. And I'd say I think all of them were covered by the officer in the start. I would just like to say we have already heard that for this saying there will not be any trees being removed. I'm correct in that. And it was mentioned about the council having a cost to maintain the saying. Unless it's actually linked to a development, there will be no cost to this council. It will not be owned by them or maintained by them in any shape or form. That is correct.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the main one, which is the saying is, we all agree it is linked to the houses and whether it is premature or not. So I'm going to ask the officer, or perhaps Mark might want to respond, to tell us once more whether we can, what we should be looking at and whether it's premature or not.
This is where planning sounds a bit strange to members of the general public. I understand what you're saying entirely, but from a planning point of view, what we have in front of us and what the members of the planning committee will have to focus their minds on is that this application is to use a bit of open space as open space. It's a piece of countryside that will be turned from private to public access if it's implemented in association with the housing. And the key word is if, because all we have in front of us is that proposal. We don't have the housing. If the housing comes forward and is refused by the council, then obviously the developer would need to show where a saying is provided, and that's when a link would occur. It would also be the point at which the inspector or the council would have to consider the maintenance of that open space. And I know that isn't a nice message to give out to you, but from a planning point of view, to a professional planner and to an inspector who would subsequently look at it if the members of the planning committee refuse it tonight, that is the issue they would be looking at. It's open space being used as open space. In effect, there is a benefit because it could potentially be used for public access as opposed to being private land.
Wayne?
I would like to challenge this word prematurity with regards to the development areas that we have in Woking. We currently have an SDR strategy, and we're currently going through a call for sites, and we're at the end of this year or sometime this year we're going to go out to consultation based on those call for sites that will take us from 2026 to 2036. So the word prematurity for me is the most suitable place for this application, along with the housing, is to go within that call for sites. At the moment, I absolutely agree with what everybody said. It's it's a very nice place. We were there on Friday, so thank you for organising that, actually. But it is a separation gap, and we need to maintain our separation gaps, and we need to stand by our core strategy in CP11. So I think that it will not be getting my support this evening because I think they are linked. And I think we have to treat prematurity in the way of, if the applicant wants for us to consider this, it should be considered in the current call for sites.
Chair, would you like me to
Yeah, please.
So if the housing application was before us, for example, the issue about the local plan, you could argue that it was premature because it's not identified in our local plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise that the housing should be approved. The use of open space as open space is a use entirely compatible with a green gap and a rural uses. It always has been acceptable in policy in the borough and will almost certainly continue to be acceptable to have a countryside use in the countryside. which a SANG is, and so that position is highly unlikely to change at any point in the future. And it's for that reason officers are saying the SANGs are premature, the housing, you can well argue is premature, but officers are indicating that the SANGs are premature for that reason.
Michelle?
I believe the site is premature. I don't care if they do say, if you say it isn't premature. I do believe it is. And the reason I believe it is, it's trying to influence the planning committee to accept another application in the future. This site is not a reserve site by Woking Borough Council at this point. So therefore, it's not in our core strategy. I agree with Wayne. I believe it should be considered for a site for the future, from 2026 to 2036, but it would have to go through the local plan update process. It should not be done now. This is the nice fancy picture of what they want to do here. Now this fancy picture has nothing to do with anything because it's just a plain field. It's going to be a plain field. Why in the world are we considering it now? It should be considered along with the houses. This nice little area here, which I've seen pictures of also, where they want to describe what houses there are. In the application itself, it talks about the houses coming forward. So it is linked to the houses. It's not an isolated site. I believe we should reject this.
Malcolm?
I have similar views, David. At the moment, it is a large open space. It's quite attractive as a gap, we think. Turning it into a SANG will obviously cost some money if and when it is converted to a SANG. And I cannot imagine any individual or a company spending money making a SANG unless there's a reason for having to do it. And that's why, obviously, it's likely to be associated with a development, which we would also want to speak about if it were here. The creation of a SANG is likely, presumably, to enable people in a local development to use it as a recreational area. And that would therefore mean the development is part of it. If the development were to happen, then the SANG wouldn't be created, so they do go very much together. We would speak equally against the housing development if and when that came, because it would be putting houses into an area where we haven't currently looked or planned or evaluated as a suitable development area. So I'm not happy with this application either.
Nothing to respond to that.
No, we set out a position now to take that.
Any other members? Oh, Angus?
Thank you, Chairman. It is always a dilemma for the committee when we have one view and the officers in their professional capacity say something different, and we do have to look at it carefully. I do hope for my colleague here that this committee would not be swayed, whatever happened with any future application, whatever was agreed or not agreed today. I think I'm right in saying we've rather loosely used this term gap. Unfortunately, that word was dispensed with under the local plan. It doesn't reduce at all our wish to keep separation, but we can't, I believe, fall back on that particular, as it were, rule. I think it's rather significant and a pity that the applicant is driving this to what I feel annoy both the residents and the members of this committee. And they may be here today, but they're not willing to come forward and speak. Just one question. Was any request made by the officers to the applicant to agree to hold this application until any housing application came to committee? Because I think that would have satisfied us and allowed a smooth transition of planning.
No, we've been asked to make a decision on this by the applicant. It's they paid their money, they made a separate application. They would like a decision respectfully.
John?
Yes, I mean, Angus is right about the word gap, but it was replaced by separation of settlements. So call it a gap, but it's a duck. It looks like a duck and quacks like a duck. I guess it's a duck. The other thing I would say, it's a shame the applicant's not here tonight, because I'd like to ask them why they want this thing.
Yeah.
And unless they're not here, I think I'll ask the officer, why do you think they want this thing?
There's no disguising the fact that this SANG could be used as land to support housing applications in the future. However, at this stage, it's just being proposed as a country park in effect, and nobody is hiding, the applicants are hiding the fact that it can be used for housing in the future, but until that point, it needs to be considered as a country park, and members can reach the decision that they want to reach on the merits of the case, but the applicant is within their rights to put forward an application for a potential SANG which may in the future support housing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get built. If no housing comes forward, then every chance the SANG won't get built, but it future-proofs their options, but it doesn't make getting the housing any easier really, because SANG provision could be found elsewhere.
Okay, I understand that, but it's premature. I mean, when will we see the housing application? That's what I'd like to know. I mean, we're sitting here deciding on this. This, I assume, came in later than the housing application, so where's the planning application for the housing? When will we see that?
The housing application is still going to be some time away from determination. It's going to be subject to a public consultation in the coming days on new information, and yeah, it will be determined at a date to be determined in the future.
Okay, well, I believe what you just said, that this is premature.
Okay, we have two people then indicated, and hopefully then we'll be able to go for vote. So if you've got some viewpoints, Michelle, then Mike.
This is not a country park. This is a field. There are plenty of fields in Hurst. I'm assuming that means that all of Hurst is a country park. There are plenty of fields in the other parts of the borough. I'm assuming they're all country parks as well. It's a field. It's not a country park. There's no recreation facilities being offered by this applicant to make it a SANG. It's just a field.
Mike?
I would like to test this one. So we approve this tonight, and then in a few months' time we get the next one and we refuse it, the application for the housing. It then goes to the inspector, and the inspector says, well, you must have known that this was going to come through, so that you've already approved the SANG. What kind of planning committee are you?
Mark, do you want to respond to that, please?
The planning inspector would be duty bound, as this planning committee is, to assess the application in accordance with the development plan and all material considerations. And the development plan says that this is a piece of open space being used as open space. And to coin the statement that Councillor Shepard Debay made, they're using a field as a field. And in planning terms, that's fine. That's the issue that you're facing.
John? I would agree, Mark, with you, but we all know, sitting here, this is to facilitate the building of 250 houses. So can they stop bringing applications to us, which are, somebody said earlier on, just seems to annoy the residents. Yeah. Let's get the substantive application brought to us, and then we can make a decision whether or not it is sustainable, and then we can approve the SANG if it is sustainable.
Right, last comment then, Angus.
I think we're all moving towards some sort of refusal of this, for which we would need to be very careful of the wording of that, and we would ask for officers' advice on that. But before we do, is there a period, were we to propose to defer this item, that could run for? I'm just asking for professional advice of that as another way forward.
The applicant, excuse me, the applicant has asked us to determine the application, so I assume that if we don't, they will appeal. I hesitate to point out that from a planning point of view, in terms of policy and decision making, it's a black and white approval. If you choose to refuse it for whatever reason, and I know your next question will be, are there any sustainable reasons for refusal? I think what I've just said makes it fairly clear that I'm really struggling to give you anything on that front. It would be a case where it's pretty certain that any inspector, if asked to rule costs, would do so against the council.
Abuse of the planning system.
Right, thank you members, thank you officers. I think we've had some clear direction, but obviously I am hearing from members of the committee that they are perhaps looking to refuse the application. Is there anyone that would like to put forward an alternative recommendation before I take the one that's on the agenda? Not at the moment? Okay. There's no other recommendations then. We need to go to the one on the agenda, which is on page 12, which is to grant planning permission with the conditions which are set out on the agenda. All those in favour of approving this application, please show. Right, so that's one. All those in favour against the application, please show. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's so that motion falls, or recommendation falls. So now I'm thinking the procedure is we do have to have an alternative recommendation, which I just asked for a few moments ago. So could please someone put forward a reason for refusal?
I suggest that this be brought back when we live together with the planning application for 250
Good. So Mark just answered that point. Well, I will just ask Mark to just reply once more on it so that we can't do that.
Might need some help legally, but the application is still not determined. But you've made a clear indication that you wish to refuse it. I don't believe it's in your gift now to go back on where you got to.
We would suggest that they actually
Michelle?
We would suggest they bring this application forward when the housing application comes forward, instead of trying to abuse the planning committee and the planning process in the meantime.
I'm just saying, Michelle, we can all agree with that sentiment, but it's not something that we can do with the policies we have in place at the moment. I do need a planning reason. Angus looks like he's going to help us out.
Well, I know we've been advised that it is not premature, but I think that is the common thread of what members have been saying, so I would propose that this application is refused on the grounds of prematurity being brought forward ahead of the associated housing applications.
Chair.
Sorry, good one.
As a professional opinion, I should advise that that is almost certainly going to result in an award of costs because it's not a reasonable grounds for refusal.
Thank you. Malcolm.
We would suggest that this application be resubmitted with the development to which it relates, which is tying them together rather than judging bit by bit and in the wrong order.
I believe this would encourage other developers to try to take the nick out of the planning system right now and do the same thing if they thought they could get away with it. This person gets away with it and gets the 250 houses eventually for the same reason. I think other people will do the same. I believe it's a bad precedent to set.
On that issue, we can't force them to resubmit the application. National planning policy is very clear that all applications must be determined on their own merits.
John.
I think prematurity is an issue here. Everybody's mentioned it. My suggestion would be that by the time that it goes to any sort of appeal, I would assume we would have got a planning application for the housing facility. So I'm quite prepared to take the risk that you just highlighted on the basis that it's premature, okay, and it's only been submitted to support the housing application, which we haven't yet determined. And I'm quite happy, and I don't know whether the rest of the committee feel comfortable about that, but I'm quite happy to do that on that basis.
Agnes?
Are you in fact seconding my proposal?
Yes, Angus, I am.
Just the formality of it. I think it does seem the only way forward, unless the officers could offer us something which they think might be less liable to bring costs. but I suspect they won't.
I'm
Or can't.
Yeah, I'm confident, Angus, that there isn't, but I will give the officers one last chance to see if there's anything else to add.
There is nothing better that we can offer you.
Can we just clarify? Yeah, just points of clarification. There was some uncertainty about whether or not there's a current application for the housing, and I think the report points out there's an outline application for 250 houses, and there will be a reconsultation, which Ashley pointed out earlier. So the application is on hand. Unfortunately for the planning committee, we don't get to decide when the application gets determined. It's a question of process. We have to determine this application as submitted.
Yeah, sorry. So I just heard your question. Malcolm said, was one reason good enough? Well, most certainly, if there is only one reason, then that is fine. You go with that. And I think everyone on the table has been mentioning prematurity. Even though I voted in favour, I do agree it is premature. So Angus has put forward the reason. Did you say it again, Angus, or shall I read it out what I wrote down?
If you've written it down, it might be more accurate.
I'll have a go then. It's on the grounds of prematurity ahead of the housing application, which has not yet been determined. Angus has put it forward. John has seconded it. So now we will go to the vote. All those in favour of that, please show. So that's the 8 again. All those against is still the 1. Well, 7, yes, I do apologize. It adds up to 8. So the application has been refused. Thank you very much.